Today we continue on with our NHL Offseason Plan series. We're now talking with the 20th ranked team from the NHL's regular season, the New York Islanders. What do we expect from Lou Lamoriello to do this offseason to get ready for next year? Can they bounce back? Will we see significant changes? We'll discuss the possibilities coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, today we're taking a look at the New York Islanders offseason and what they're likely going to be doing to get ready for next year. Now, in case you're newer to this video series, we've already completed teams 32 all the way up to 20, which is where we are here today. We're going to do a quick recap of their regular season. We're going to take a look at their salary cap space, look at expiring contracts that they may need to take care of this offseason, and then we're going to look at the top burning questions facing his franchise. What are their biggest objectives, in my opinion, that they need to take care of before we get into next season? So first up, let's do a quick recap here of the 21-22 New York Islanders regular season. They finished with a record of 37, 35, and 10 for 84 points. Of course, missed the playoffs. Not a good season for the New York Islanders. A major step back when it comes to their results after having not only made the playoffs the past few years, but had some pretty deep playoff runs as well. Of course, they were within a goal of defeating the Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning last year, and very well could have been, that close to going to the Stanley Cup Finals or possibly even winning it all. Hard to say. Looking at their breakdown of some team statistics here, they've scored 229 goals, which was 23rd best, so that's okay, but it's not good enough to get into the playoffs. The New York Islanders definitely need to make some adjustments to score more, and they need to be able to be more offensive. There's no doubt about that. Goals against continue to be strong. Team defense has been a strong point under the Barry Trotz regime, allowing 231 goals for its 7th best in the NHL. So they've been pretty fortunate the last number of years to have some pretty solid goaltending and pretty strong team defensive structure and defensive play, which has allowed them to be in the upper half of the league on defensive metrics. Now, of course, like I said, though, when you can't combine that with enough scoring, it's still going to be tough to win. You're trying to win a lot of 2-1, 3-2 games, and that can be pretty tricky, especially where we saw scoring for the most part across the league this year was up, and it was up a decent amount, but it was not really up for the Islanders, which was the problem, why so many teams got ahead of them. Looking at their special teams, they actually had some pretty good results here. The power play was actually 22.1% for 12th best in the NHL, while the penalty kill was 4th best at 84.2. So it's a little bit unusual to see a team have such strong special teams but not get into the playoffs. Obviously, it shows this really puts that much more emphasis on the fact we've already mentioned here a couple times briefly in this short video so far. The scoring was a problem for the Islanders, especially early on in the season. And now we know as well it's not just scoring, it's scoring at even strength. That's more of the issue here. They could definitely use probably a little bit, I think, of a change in style of play. And to some degree, it's a personnel issue. They had too many players not have good seasons, and it's just as simple as that. They have a lot of good personnel that can score. A lot of them didn't live up to their expectations, and some who recovered at the end to make their season on paper at least look a little bit better, but it was, sporadic and a little bit too little too late in some cases to really help the team get into the playoffs. The Islanders, standings-wise in the Eastern Conference, weren't that far off from making the playoffs. If you look at it strictly from who was the teams closest to the playoff teams, but there was a big gap this year. I mean, all the playoff teams in the East had over 100 points, so they certainly were out of the playoffs by a big margin, even though they certainly were one of the better non-playoff teams. Now, of course, the New York Islanders, in my opinion, had, if you don't want to call them excuses, but they certainly had a few things going against them early in the season. With the opening of their new building, the new arena at UBS, they had to start the season on a very long road trip. That did not go well at all. Now, fortunately for them, I guess, you can only put so much of the blame on this. Some of those games, I have to look back at the schedule to remember exactly how many, but there was a decent amount of them that was within their division, which really wasn't that far away. So they were not like they were on the road away from home for like a full 4 or 6 weeks or anything like that. They, for the most part, they had a lot of games that were close enough that they would actually end up back home at the end of the night. So it's not a complete excuse, but not being able to play at home for all that time was not good. And then while they were on this long road trip to start the season, themselves, along with probably Ottawa, were probably the two hardest hit teams when it comes to having COVID outbreaks within the team that were not shut down. I know there's some that felt teams like the Islanders and the Senators maybe should have pushed more to the league to be shut down because other teams at least seem to have situations that were not as bad or equally as bad, and they did get shut down and they were able to pause their games and get them rescheduled and they could play them when they were healthier. Now, would that have made a difference? I don't really know if they could have got that, sorted out. It's hard to say, right? Because the rest of their schedule would have been more hectic and they would have been probably more tired. It was a hard enough season for all these players as it was. I don't really know if that would have been the end-all be-all, but I do think it's fair to say that certainly had an impact. And when you look at how their season finished here, if they could have got a few more wins early on because things snowballed out of control quickly, they opened their new building with this losing streak. It just was snowballed very, very quickly on the Islanders. And if they could have had a better record early on, even if it was a 500 record instead of being subpar, that might have been enough to get them go down the stretch. They would have been playing more meaningful games. It would have had a better chance. It was. So after all that, Lou Lamoriello fires Barry Trotz, which most of us were completely shocked by. I don't think it's Barry Trotz's fault that the team didn't succeed. They've already hired Lane Lambert to take over as the new head coach. Of course, he was Barry Trotz's main assistant coach for a long time, through not only his time with the Islanders, but before that with the Capitals and before that with the Predators. They worked together a real long time. He's been a guy who's been kind of looked upon as being one of the, I guess you could say, top assistant coaches across the league that was due for an opportunity to be a head coach in the near future. He had been, interviewed by other teams and looked upon as one of those guys other teams were interested in. So certainly this appears to be a case. I think that Lamoriello kind of saw Lambert as likely being their next head coach. Trotz had a year left on his contract. They had a bad season. Obviously, after hearing the players in their exit interviews, probably wanted to change things up. And I guess I don't think we can call it overreaction, but Trotz's firing, I think, is as much about, he says, giving a new voice as it is to making sure they don't lose Lambert. At least that appears to be the case. Because if they would have waited longer until they had, I guess, probably more of a reason to justify Trotz's departure, then Lambert might have been gone. So to me, that's kind of where things are at. That appears to be his strategy in that regard. So certainly a lot of things went wrong. They had a lot of underperforming players early on, but we saw later into the season, guys like Palmieri really picked it up. Parise picked it up, but it was too little too late. They could have been more consistent across the board. Could have made a big difference for this team. Now let's jump over and take a look at their salary cap situation here. They ended the 21-22 season with $2.6 million available on the cap, and they have 18 contracts on the books already for 22-23, totaling $70.4 million. So they have just over $12 million, just shy of $12.1 million for available money to spend for next year. So this is a team that's out of the playoffs, needs a bit of a, you could say, a shuffle at least. I mean, I don't think they're going to have huge, teardown or anything of that nature, but they do need to make a few changes and bring in some new personnel. They do have some room to do it, but not a lot if you factor in the players that are on expiring deals. Out of those 18 contracts, they do have to replace, we're looking at signing at least, probably 3-4 players. So maybe even 5. So certainly you need to be able to factor that in. And after that, there's not much money left. So let's now look at those contracts to see who those players are. On the RFA side of things, we have Kiefer Bellows and Noah Dobson. Dobson certainly had a real solid year to finish out his entry-level deal, really emerged this year, proved he could be, a much stronger, bigger role back there on the defense and be a top-pair defense guy, play some big minutes, and certainly produce offensively. Bellows, another season where he was in and out of the lineup, didn't really play a ton. I don't know that it's fair to say that he's going to be back. We'll see. I don't think they would not qualify him. I think he'll get a qualifying offer, but I wouldn't be shocked if he was traded. On the UFA side of things, they get Zdeno Chara and Andy Green and Sebastian Aho. I don't think anybody's expecting Chara or Green to return. Rumor has it they're both likely to retire. Time will tell before that becomes official because we haven't heard anything as of right now. When it comes to Sebastian Aho, difficult to say. I don't know what it's not really a big important player that really plays a big role for this team, so I'm not really sure what their plans are. Maybe they re-sign him to a cheaper short-term deal. Maybe he departs. I'm not really sure what the answer is on that front. Now, what are the top burning questions facing this franchise moving into the offseason? Well, to me, we're going to go back to coaching here. The biggest question to me, because when I started prepping this video a number of days ago, of course, this was kind of prior to Trotz Lambert situation coming about. So at that point, I didn't know that we were going to have to be talking about the coach. But really, to me, I really wonder where Lambert was connected to Trotz for so long. Is the change of head coach really going to make a difference here? Are we going to see a different New York Islanders team? I would stress for Lambert to be cautious on that for a couple of reasons. One, I think they need to make some adjustments. But if you get too far away from that defensive structure, like that's not going to be good for this team. Like they play such a strong, solid team defensive game that if they get away from that and they start allowing more goals, that's going to be a big problem. At the same time, you do need to find a way to be more offensive, and you do need to find a way for, especially like a Matthew Barzal, to participate and produce more. And he's going to need some line mates to do that. So I just really wonder. I know he was going for a new voice, is what he said when Lou fired Trotz. That's what he said to the media, was he just felt they needed a new voice. Well, it's difficult for assistant coaches to go from assistant coach to head coach. It's like playing a game of good cop, bad cop. Oftentimes the assistant coaches are looked upon as the good cop, and they have a completely different relationship with the players than the head coach does. The head coach makes the final decisions. The assistant coach can kind of be that buffer in between, and the relationship is very different. Now you have to go to being the head coach, and we'll see if the relationship with the team changes. It can work. I'm not saying it won't. I'm just saying it's challenging. It's quite often sometimes easier to come in either from a different organization or from a different team, even if it's from the minor league team coming up. Either way, because you don't have those pre-existing relationships that you need to make adjustments to. So is things really going to change with Lambert being the head coach? I honestly have some questions or concerns on that front. And to me, I'm not sure that, as much as I know he's a well-respected assistant coach ready for an opportunity, I just don't know what he's going to bring that's going to be different than Trotz, considering how connected they were. Those are questions that I don't know the answer to. Clearly, we'll have to wait and see, but I'm curious to see how he's going to balance things out to make some adjustments here. Question number 2, is a Matthew Barzal extension on the horizon this offseason? Signing Barzal long-term should be a major priority for Lou Lamoriello. Now, of course, there was some people who thought that he wouldn't sign if Trotz was the coach. Some people I kind of believe that's not to be the case, but I do think it's fair to say that Matthew Barzal, when having his exit interviews, is going to express concerns on the direction of the team and his abilities. Certainly, he's going to want some line mates that better suit and complement his style of play, where they can work together and produce a lot more offensively. And he needs a coaching staff to allow him to play that he needs to be successful. Now, not to say that it's not important to play team defense. It certainly is. Look at teams that are in the playoffs right now, that like a Connor McDavid and like those other top guys that are well ahead of Barzal when it comes to that, and maybe struggling to balance that offense with defense, right? So he's used to playing in a structure that does that. So it's probably good for his game in the grand scheme of things, but he needs to be able to produce more. He can be a solid point per game player or better, but he needs the personnel to play on his wing. We saw him play for a while there with Jordan Eberle. That wasn't really getting it done. And there's a lot of inconsistencies with who he's played with. And look at some of the other wingers on this team. It's just, it's not there. So they need a player to play with Barzal, and they need an extension in place. They need to give a commitment to make sure that they have a long-term deal in place for this guy for cost control, cap purposes, and just to gain a commitment on both sides, as he's by far their most dynamic player. Or you have to think maybe they trade him, but I don't really think they want to do that. Trading a highly gifted offensive player like him doesn't usually work out well. I would probably, argue that it's not wise to do that, but they need players to play with him, or he's never going to realize his full potential. It's just that simple. Now, the next question, because we kind of answered 2 questions in one, because I have down as an extension for Barzal as well as a scoring winger now. Who could the winger be? Like, who are they going to bring in to the Islanders to play with Matthew Barzal? there's certainly some free agents that I think would be interesting. We're looking at Philip Forsberg out of Nashville, Johnny Gaudreau out of Calgary. We don't even know for sure, though, that players like that are going to make it to free agency. Right now, they're not signed, so there's potential that it's there. It's, the longer things go on, the more likely they're going to be able to speak to other teams. I don't know if they would have any interest or not, but there's certainly a couple of key names that I think Lou needs to swing big. The only problem is they're going to command so much money that it's going to be almost impossible to do that. So in order to satisfy the Barzal winger, you almost need to look at the next question here is, can you move some veterans to shed some salary cap space? That's much needed. And I hope that in the case of Lou here, that the answer is yes. He pulled off some magic tricks last offseason, moving some money that some people thought was going to be very, very difficult. Now, I talked in a video on the channel yesterday about the possibility of Josh Bailey being moved to the Arizona Coyotes. I think that's a real possibility. We know the Coyotes are in the market to take on some contracts that don't have too much term, but a decent amount of money to help them get to the cap floor to make sure they're compliant and to try to put a semi-competitive team on the ice as they go into this new stage of their existence here, going into the smaller ASU arena. I don't know that they're really going to want to be super competitive. I think they're going to want to be competing for the top draft picks for the next couple of seasons. That appears to be the direction the team is heading. But a guy like Bailey, if the right attachment is placed with him, whether it be a draft pick or a prospect, maybe it's Kiefer Bellows, maybe it's a second-round pick, I don't know what it is, they will likely take that contract. He's got 2 years left at $5 million. If they can do that, that gives them a lot of flexibility. That could work. Now, another guy to look to is Varlamov. Now, I know he's a good goalie. I don't think you want to treat him. Nothing to do with his play whatsoever. It's nice having a two-headed goalie monster like Varley and Sorokin. Varley served his purpose, and Sorokin has proven he's ready to be the starter and play the bulk of the games. Now, at the same time, though, you do need a good backup. But the problem is Varlamov is almost like a luxury you can't afford anymore. It's not that you want to keep it, but at this point, unless he was a free agent that could renegotiate for less money, which he's not, it's tough to keep that. So you could trade Varley for the space. Maybe you get something a little bit more in return because he's got more value than like a Bailey, for example. But you almost need to let Sorokin run with it and find a cheaper backup goaltender to save some space. Those two players alone, you can create almost $10 million in cap space. That can go a long way. You have $12 million now. That $12 million jumps to $22 million. You got to sign Dobson, who's going to get a decent amount of money. And after that, the rest of it could be used to find a scoring winger for Barzal, maybe even another defenseman as well. You could probably use another D, but it's going to have to be somebody a little bit less expensive, a left shot, number 4, like top 4 kind of guy would be ideal. Could they try to trade for Jacob Chychrun out of Arizona? Could that be part of a Bailey trade? I don't know, because to me, he makes a ton of sense for them in a lot of ways. But a couple of things to caution on is Chychrun does have injury issues and misses a lot of time. Number 2 is I don't think they have the assets to pull it off like a lot of other teams that they're going to be competing with Chychrun for. Chychrun is almost a guarantee to be traded. The Coyotes have made that clear. Chychrun himself has made it clear that he wants to go. So I think it's going to happen. But if you look at the other teams that are likely to be involved in the mix, they have deeper prospect pools, more picks, and more currency to play with here. That I think the Islanders, as much as they should try, they're going to have some tough competition, and I don't know that they can pull it off. They may have to go to another, I'm not sure who that guy could be. Maybe they consider, I know it wouldn't be unlike Lou to bring, what does Lou like? He likes familiarity. Could they bring back Nick Leddy, who's now a free agent and a cheaper contract? I don't know how I feel about that. I've seen somebody suggest it. But you know what? Even if they did, I would hope it would be short-term and not a lot of money. Maybe he's a kind of a gap filler, if you will, for a year or two till they figure out a more of a long-term D to play there. I don't know. I mean, he can still skate well. He's still playing well at the Blues in the playoffs. Maybe, but it has to be for the right cheap price. But I'm not convinced that's going to happen. But we know how Lou likes to stick with players he knows. He's done it over and over and over again. And I wouldn't be shocked, but we'll see what happens. But they certainly need a left shot defenseman who can play top 4, and they need a scoring winger for Barzal, and that is absolutely by far their top needs. It seems like they're not overly thrilled with the longer-term development of Kiefer Bellows, Oliver Wahlstrom, even Anthony Beauvillier has been inconsistent. I know it's sad because these are 3 of their younger players who were all drafted with good potential, good pedigree, have had their moments when things have looked good, but have yet to be consistent to the point that they're regulars. Now, I wonder with the coaching change, will Lambert feel any different or better about some of these guys and be able to find a role for them that works so they have more success? That's a question mark. I don't think they're going to part with all of them, but obviously the Islanders are picking lower in the draft this year. They're in the middle of the first round. So between their first round pick and guys like Bellows, Bo, and Wahlstrom, they're probably your most likely trade candidates that can get you something good in return. Now, like I said, Varlamov is a possibility to be moved. You will get a return. It's not going to be huge. And then you get Bailey, who you're probably going to have to give them something extra to take it. So kind of like what they did with Andrew Ladd. Not to that extent, of course. To me, Lou's got to get to work. There's lots of work to be done. I know Islanders fans are very frustrated. Most people were upset with the Trotz firing. Most people blame Lou for not giving a better roster. These options and like these needs that I'm talking about here today were the exact same a year ago. When we looked at last offseason, look as close as they came. I understand why it's hard to go against the group as a team when you're the GM, when you've seen how successful they can be before, but they've gotten another year older, another step slower. This is an older team. They need some youth, and they need guys like Barzal and whoever's going to play with him to be the next piece to take it forward. I mean, guys like Palmieri finished strong. Nelson had a strong year. Lee had a pretty good year. But who's to say that they won't take a step back next year? They're going to be yet another year older again, right? So you have to have that next wave. And right now they don't. So they're in danger here if they don't mix in some more youth, whether they take the guys they have and figure out a way to make them more successful or sign some younger players like a Philip Forsberg who's 27, something like that, to get some more youth here. They could be in big trouble in a couple of years to the point that they're not even, they missed the playoffs this year, but they could drop way down in a few years' time if they don't kind of see a bit of a changing of the guard here. It's that close to me. Lots of good players, and I think they can turn this thing around quickly if they're smart. But if they go about it the wrong way and they don't get some youth in this lineup, it's going to be tough in a couple of years. And it's just that simple. The prospect pool is decent. It's not phenomenal. There's some good pieces there that I think could become NHL players, but there's not like a big elite level talent that's going to expect it to come in like a former first rounder that you're going to expect to be a star. We don't see that right now for the Islanders prospect pool. So we'll see how they go about things, but their needs are obvious. They've been obvious for a year. Hopefully Lou addresses them this time, or he might be the next one to face the consequences if this team does not get better next year. Let me know your thoughts on the Islanders offseason down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.